Welcome to TAPA Asia Pacific webinar on the impact of coronavirus on manufacturing. And today we are joined by David Collins, CEO, China Manufacturing Consultants. With the shutdown of the global manufacturing base, TAPA members and the supply chain as a whole have concerns of where this virus is going. So let's go across to David and hear what his advice is. Over to you, David.
Consultants would just like to welcome you all. I think it's about 2 o'clock. I'm in the United Arab Emirates right now working, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning here. So if you like, I'll start to go over our webinar on the effects of the recent virus that's affecting China and now most of the rest of the world. Our agenda today: what is the effect of the coronavirus? How much longer will there be shutdowns in China? Can staff from other countries go to China? What to do if suppliers cannot fill orders? What is the impact in China and the rest of the world? And should companies move out of China? And how can we mitigate risk now and for problems in the future? So what is the effect? The effect in China has been obviously severe. Wuhan and numerous other cities are actually still under lockdown. Under pressure from the Chinese government, some cities are slowly returning to work. This is happening especially in the south of China and in the east around Jiangsu province, and in northern China also, and around Beijing and other areas. One of the big problems is local governments have to issue certificates for companies to be allowed to start work. The government inspects the workplace, and the companies then are issued the right to work. One of the issues with this is it's not consistent. Even if you get, for example, a certificate in Shenzhen, some of the local entities like Bao'an or others might have other things that they want you to do. So this has been confusing to many people, and the confusion of this is hurt some companies coming back to work. At the beginning of the process, about 40% of the people showed up. I thought that was higher than I would have expected, but talking to people I know in many of the different cities, they said they got about 40% to show up. And some companies actually already have 90% of the workforce in place. But let's talk about the process to get people to show up. Local people in the cities, for example, if you're in Shenzhen or if you're in Dongguan, Shanghai, some of the cities in Jiangsu province, if you live in those cities, you can come to work right away. As long as you have your ID card, you can come to work. You have to obviously wear masks. They also require temperature checks every day, and they ensure that you're healthy. If you're coming from another city, even a city next door, there's a good chance you're going to have to wait 14 days in quarantine. Now, this is a big problem if you go back and forth to your city. But if you go to the city and you live like most companies have in dormitories, the place was the companies are set up so that the dormitory has to have a floor or 2 floors, whatever the number should be, where people who are quarantined stay, and those people will quarantine for 14 days before they have to go to work. This obviously is a big decision on the people. Do they want to come to work? Do they want to sit in a dormitory for 14 days, quarantine before they can go to work or not? But this has now been going on for a little while. Yesterday, I just received information from the European Union Chamber of Commerce and the German Chamber of Commerce. We did a survey, and the survey was from over 400 companies that they work with. These are obviously European and Western companies. There's a few Chinese companies who belong to the chambers, and they're involved. And most of them say that the virus has had a very high impact on their on their uh, on their business, 59%. Medium impact about 30%, low impact 7%, and about 4 or 5% saying it's just really too early to tell. In the case of most of these companies, they're saying simply that they're going to have to reduce the amount of product that they get out this year, or they're being severely affected by the fact that they can't get supplies from suppliers who they need. China has an incredibly excellent manufacturing area, and it is very keyed into each other. There's an awful lot of suppliers to suppliers, etc., down to the third and fourth tier. This creates an incredible amount of interdependence on the different companies. So even if one supplier is down, it could create ripple effects throughout, so that the main customer or the main manufacturer can't work. Most of these guys say there's a decreased demand for products and services. 56% of those surveys said there's increased demand. They're not going to be able to meet their contract deliveries. About 47% of the companies surveyed said they won't be able to meet their contract deliveries. Staff shortages, obviously right around 50%. Almost everybody has staff shortages. In fact, I'm sort of surprised at that number of 50%. I think there's many companies that might have had our services companies in there that people can work from home. Because if you are a service company and you can work at home, you are being told to work from home. Work on your computer, do things. You don't have to go into the office. This is really the normal. Only in places where you have to have people on the assembly line are they asking people to come in. Staff, HR, finance, those kind of staff are staying home and working. 44% say this is going to help stop and hurt investment decisions. And the other one is the cost of HR compliance, which again is wildly different from province to province. I have one client that has a factory in Shenzhen and a factory in Dongguan, and he had to do two different compliance efforts to do that. And that is true throughout China at this point in time. We can go over some more of this a little bit later, but people are definitely adjusting their targets for this year. Even Foxconn announced that in the first quarter, they're lessening their targets by 42%. And Foxconn's one of the largest suppliers in all of China. How much longer will there be shutdowns? In most of China, the shutdowns are almost over, except in Hubei province. President Xi Jinping asked the people to get back to work. So in general, the shutdowns are slowly but surely going away. Our consultants in China, which we have a large group of consultants in China, estimate that by the middle of March, most places except Hubei province will be back to normal. And it'll be a different normal, obviously, because there will be little pockets of things, and there will also be, Hubei is a big province. There's still about 40 to 50 million people locked down, and that's going to hurt productivity quite a bit. The real problem is still movement is restricted, so people are afraid to leave their cities. They don't want to go into the quarantine or not, but quite frankly, people are starting to run out of money, and they have to get back to work. And as you know, the way China works, so many people from the provinces in the West go to the East to work that they're going to have to travel, and they're going to have to get back to work. In Shenzhen and Dongguan, for example, some of the governments, even though they have many different problems and issues, they worked hard to get their people back to work. Dongguan especially really did a good job in getting the government officials out to give certificates to the companies so the companies could get back to work, and worked with them quite well. There are people who go back in and check the company again to make sure that the company is still doing their work properly, still taking the temperatures. They're supposed to take temperatures every day, make sure masks are there, hand washing stations. And kind of another funny, interesting thing is that it used to be where people ate lunch together, very close, and talked. Now lunch tables have been separated. People don't sit together and eat lunch. I've seen many pictures of it, and I should have put a picture up for you to see. It's kind of an interesting thing. They try to keep people separated at lunch, and in general, separated um, from each other. We believe most of China will be up and running by the end of March at the latest. Wuhan is probably a different story. That I really have no knowledge. I talked to some friends in Wuhan yesterday, and they're still some of them are still locked in the house, you know. And when I say locked in the house, they're not shut down. It's no jail, but you know, they're asked not to move about. People are told not to get into groups of more than 3. People are allowed to go out and get some food every 2 or 3 days, and all. Can staff from other countries go to China? Sure, you can go, but you would be stuck in a 14-day quarantine probably. If you had to go from city to city, let's say you had operations in more than one city, each time you move from city to city, the chances are you would have to sit in some type of quarantine. Of course, many of the countries that we come from, be it America, Western Europe, or whatever, they've stopped flights. So getting to China is not easy. There are ways to do it, of course. One of my employees is in Canada right now, and he found out that he could fly to Cambodia and then Cambodia to Hong Kong and then Hong Kong into China. Interesting enough, the Hong Kong border with China has 13 entrances. Only 3 are open now. They've closed all the entrances in and out of China except 3, so they can watch over them much better. So going to China is not easy. You know, you can obviously use companies like us who have Chinese people. There's other companies like us who have Chinese people already there. You can get a hold of them, and we can do that. And we're getting many requests for that. Can you help us? Can you go into our facility and see what's happening? And so we're starting to get some business that way. And I got a feeling that's going to be something that's going to occur a lot. People will be looking for consultants, services companies, things like that they trust, that can go into their suppliers and make sure that the suppliers are up and ready to go. Overall, I would say it's difficult for you to bring your people into China. If they do come into China, when they go back, there's a good chance they'll have to be quarantined in their home countries. And many people won't like that. Obviously, there's still telephone, there's Zoom like what we're on now, and there's many different capabilities of getting to know. And if you're concerned, again, companies like myself and others can have their Chinese employees go and take a look. But by the way, we still have the same problem. If we're not from a city, if we don't have a consultant from a city, our consultant may have to, depending on where they're from, may have to sit through a quarantine also to go to another city. And that's kind of why we're saying that probably mid to end March, we think there will be good opportunity to move about, at least for Chinese people to move about in China. Not so sure about going into other places. Many Chinese cities still won't let you in without a city pass. So for example, I live in Kunshan, which is a city just outside of Shanghai, part of Suzhou. And Suzhou or Kunshan forced you to have a pass. So what normally I would do is fly into Shanghai, get on the fast train, get off the fast train and walk to my house, which is across the street from the train station. And I can't do that now, even though in China you have to have a certificate that is a Westerner that says, you're staying at this place. I have that. It's a paper certificate, but if I don't have the city certificate, the city certificate or the city card that says where I'm from, the hukou, I wouldn't be allowed to go to my city now. And again, we expect that to open up soon. Generally speaking, even though it is possible to go to China, we do recommend that companies not send people at this point in time. Sending people is still, I think, a little bit rough. And Quinshan just put out yesterday, which was sent to me, a list of things that you can and can't do to get into Quinshan, and it basically covered what I just said. Don't travel, don't come. If you do come, you may have to be in quarantine. You'll have to register with the government or the police station when you get there. The police are checking people coming off of the trains and airplanes. So where you're gonna go. What's the global impact? The global impact is going to have to be huge. China's the world's workshop. So I don't believe there's any country or industry that's likely to escape some kind of disruption, especially when you think about the electronics industry. There's no stronger or better place in the world than China for the electronics industry. The electronics from South China, from Center China. In fact, Foxconn and some other big electronics companies have operations in Wuhan, and they haven't started up yet. So there's no question that there's going to be huge disruptions, especially if you're doing anything in electronics. The auto industry will be disrupted because they're just in time. Just in time creates a situation where even some small parts might not be able to get to another tier 1 or tier 2 supplier that needs to use those small parts to keep moving. If that occurs, then the auto factory will shut down. I was in the auto industry for about 25 years, and while just in time is the only way the auto industry can really do money, as it saves incredible amount of cash, an incredible amount of inventory, because inventory costs a lot of money to hold, it nonetheless, when little problems like this happen, can create downtime for your company. Obviously, there's some parts and things like that on the water traveling. Those parts will get to the factories, and depending on when those things shut down and those parts aren't available, will be how the factories shut down. Factories closer to China, which have a shorter supply chain, will shut down faster than factories away from China, where the supply chain's a little bit longer and there's more boats on the water or trains moving. In addition to production delays, there's also delays in containers. Obviously, some of the 10 biggest ports in the world, 4 of them are in China. So containers will be stuck in China, containers that might need to be used. I read that Busan, South Korea, for example, has a 30% below normal volume of containers, since so many are stuck in China. So there could be a difficulty getting containers just to move products because of the large amount of containers still in China not being able to be moved. And again, we already talked about the electronics industry and what's happening in China and how this is going to be detrimental to the effect. And again, I'll mention that Foxconn did announce that they're going to be 42% less because of all of this. And when you consider how many cell phones they make, not just iPhones, but other people's smartphones, as well as computers and other things, Foxconn's a huge matter for that. In fact, I used to work for them, and a very good company. They do take care of their people quite well. So they're going to make sure their people are safe before they start working. So again, we're looking at probably the middle to end of March, maybe April. Listen, should you move out of China? I hear that a lot. And if you really start to think about it, I would say no. Number one, if you're going to move out of China, you have to have people already set up. This would mean your tooling, your quality systems. Can you do that in the, let's say 30 days, 60 days, even 90 days that this virus might be hurting. I mean, if you already have plans to move out of China and you have some economic reasons, yeah, keep doing it. But China still has an incredible manufacturing base. It's very, very large. It's a very good country to do business. The people work hard there. If you manage your people correctly, you can get good quality. Um, there's and others and places you might move to might not even have the infrastructure China currently has to keep things going. So do you just move because of the virus? I would say no. That could happen anywhere. There's potential. As you know, throughout the history of the world, these kinds of things have happened. If you have reason to leave China and you've already decided to leave China, go ahead. One of the things I might add to that is Standard Chartered Bank about 2 years ago did a study, and they estimated that about 300 million people are going to go into the middle class in China over the course of the next 15 years. I mean, that's basically the size of the European Union or the United States. If that's the case, and you're going to have 300 million people adding into the middle class, that offers a tremendous opportunity for companies to sell their products in China as well as to ship them around the world. So I view China as a very good place to continue to do business, as you're going to have 6, 7, 800 million customers in the next few years, but probably 300 to 400 million right now. So moving out of China won't stop the fundamental problems that are existing in China now, but at the same time, there's a lot of different and strong possibilities of big business. So unless you've already made a decision to move for whatever reasons your company wants to move, I wouldn't think about just getting out of China now. I would think about ways to mitigate what's going on. And this really is the biggest point. Do you have backup plans for future risks? And if not, this is a good chance to take a look at yourself and say, okay, future risks happen. We were living large for 30 years. We had a lot of everything's going well, but now we have a risk. These risks happen all the time. I was working in Mexico in 2009 when the H1N1 virus happened from Mexico, and we had to go ahead and make all kinds of risk assessments and things. Fortunately, it didn't affect our business because it was mainly in the center of Mexico, and at the time, the company I was managing was up in Juarez. We had other risks there due to the drug wars and things like that, which we had to mitigate. We had to do things for. We had to ensure that we didn't have problems in our supply chain due to different things that could happen with the drug wars. So can you explore alternative suppliers? Yeah, you can. Having a lot of suppliers is not always good, but you can be wary of costs and the feasibility. If you can't give enough volume to your supplier, a new supplier that you're keeping on the side, that supplier will put you third or fourth on their list. They're not going to think of you first, only if you can do it. I'm much a bigger proponent of having suppliers that you can trust, that you work well together, that you stick together with, and that can help you improve. We had that in the auto industry, and it was amazing how suppliers themselves saved us literally billions of dollars because they came up with ideas on how to change our operations, and working together as a team was really quite good. One of the other things that people don't think about is if you need 1,000 people right now, but you could probably, by using lean manufacturing, automation, other items, cut it down to 400 people or maybe 600 people, you obviously don't worry as much about people problems. They start to shorten itself. Too many people, by the way, in countries just want to go to automation. Just as a side note, automation is not a good idea just to jump into unless you have really good maintenance people and you've already, through lean manufacturing, good statistical process control, learned how to get rid of waste. If you don't get rid of waste, you just automate your waste, and so you're buying extra robots that you know need. But Increasing factory productivity really reduces the number of people needed and allows for production to continue despite some labor shortages. Also, if you do that, use standard work instructions for each job, which most of my customers don't have until we come in. You can train people. People are much easier to train and much easier to get going. So there's a big issue with people. They don't have standardized work. They don't do the standardized work and set up the job stations properly. One of the best ways to mitigate future risks in your factory is to have standardized work for each job. New people can learn the jobs. For example, in the auto industry, most of our people, we could teach them how to do a job in 4 hours. You go into an electronics factory, their jobs are so complicated and they don't need to be. They're just not set up properly. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days to teach somebody how to do a job and maybe a week to get them good at it. So again, with good standardized work and then setting up standard work instructions for each job, people can be changed in and out. Also, one of the smart things people do, and it also helps with repetitive work hurt, is you can have your job so that we used to make it so that the people knew the job in front of them and behind them, and even rotated those jobs during the day so that you didn't get repetitive work injuries. This is really good for occupational safety, and also will teach you how to have your work much more able to be changed if something happens. So if one person shows up, you have maybe 2 or 3 other people who know how to do the job, and you can then do some very good work in teaching the people or getting your lines set up. Most people that we work with in China don't have a robust bus planning system. We do a lot of work with that. And if you can get a robust planning system, if you're missing a part for one type of product, maybe your planning system can adjust so you can make other products until the part can come up. We work with customers that have, multiple products in their factories, and maybe just one part is missing from one of the products. In the meantime, you can make the other products that you need and get that going, and then just wait for the part and then fill up with the products later. So a robust planning system that you can use, and these systems can be very simply done. They can be done as simply as set up on an Excel spreadsheet, or you can get a reasonable ERP. And for the sake of people, there are very good, inexpensive ERPs in China for the different people. Young people have developed some very good ERP systems. You don't have to go out and buy something extremely expensive like SAP. You can get something relatively inexpensive, and they work in both English and they work in Chinese and even other languages. This can be a very critical. Also, it lets you know, these ERP systems lets you know what's actually in your warehouse, what parts you have, what parts you don't have, where your parts are. When you set this up and you set it up correctly, your ability to know what's going on in your factory is then the screen. You don't have to people walking into the warehouse. I can't tell you how many times I've been into factories and people have to search for parts, and they go back and find some parts behind a dusty box because they have no system in place to know what's going on. By the way, each of the other mitigation strategies we've shown will also improve overall operations, better productivity, cut costs, cash flow, and almost always improve your ability to make good quality. So having these mitigation systems in place in case there's emergency also does an awful lot of good work to help you have a well-run factory in the first place. So that was short. I said I would do it in about 30 minutes. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have and discuss anything you like. So please, if you would like to ask questions, please do.
So David, sorry, this is Alvin here. There's actually a list of questions that has been pulled onto the chat. I'm not sure, have you seen the chat? Starting from Tony, asking about the that the restrictions will be listed on the 16th of March. So how long do you anticipate the restart of the Wuhan manufacturing would be?
Okay, I'll read these through and I'll read these through and answer these questions. So,
Sure. Thank you.
if the state-owned enterprise restrictions are listed on the 16th of March, it will still take Wuhan manufacturing, I think, about 14 days to get going after that. It'll be about the 1st of April of what we are thinking. There aren't really cases of staff being laid off because the government said they couldn't lay off people. In other words, I have employees, I couldn't fire them, lay them off, or do anything to do something. There are ways to mitigate the costs, and the government is helping with taxes and other ways to mitigate the costs of holding people. They say there's cost of people being laid off, but some of that is just due to the fact that some companies have decided to close. Some companies couldn't afford this. They were companies that were on the edge in the first place, and those companies just shut down. And if that was the case and they shut down, then there was then that's going to hurt. There's cases of companies that have even written a couple weeks ago to this, hey, you owe us for 90 days, you know, because they had net 90 or net 30. Please pay us now. Goodbye. And some of the guys I know have shown me some of those things. So they will have to, but obviously in a place like China where people are very aggressive for business, new companies will pop up, but it will still hold things back. I think even though it'll take 14 days for companies to start to recover, it's going to take another month. People are going to be afraid to go to Wuhan if they're from out of province. The Chinese people don't want to just go get sick. So they're going to be afraid of that, and that's going to be a tough thing. I don't expect Wuhan businesses to get going, honestly, until potentially the end of April. In some cases, we're even saying May or June. What's the lead time for tier 2 manufacturers to return to work? Again, that is still going to be up to, will people come back? People move a lot in China. They go to different cities. So Wuhan is a big city with a big area, so there's a lot of local people who work there. But nonetheless, they still get a lot. And if people aren't willing to go to Wuhan because they're afraid, it's going to take time. The movement of people in China is huge. And especially since it's just after the Chinese New Year, where depending on whose estimates you use, 500 million to 900 million people move and go to other cities to see their family and relatives, mean that more than half the country's in another province. And since provincial movement still costs time for people to be quarantined, that's going to hurt. One of the questions is, yeah, there are government regulations for which companies cannot deduct salaries and workers due to self-quarantine. That's true in China. The government has said we can't. For example, I'm paying everybody in my company as they were working. One, I kind of think it's the right thing to do, but obviously this is going to hurt our performance this year too.
So David, hey, it's a great presentation so far. I really have enjoyed it, especially with your skill sets and your background. So, can I just come back to these tier 2 suppliers, because you touched upon it, but I do see that there's a mega risk here. You know, in terms of their cash flow, as you said, in terms of their payment terms, they're generally unfavorable, you know, either 20 days or banknote. So as you quite rightly said, look, a lot of these suppliers would have been struggling already. Do you see any help from, you know, from the larger tier 1 or the OEMs? Do you see any help coming from them in trying to stop them going under?
So
You've seen that, have you? Yeah.
Yes, and if you're a tier 1 and this tier 2 is who you have, your tooling's there, just think about it from the perspective of, if you're a tier 1, you've set up tooling and things like that at the tier 2s. You might have some investment into them, because sometimes you pay for the machines, sometimes you pay things. The tier ones are going to have to support them. This will be almost no different than, if you remember, back probably in 2008, 2009, when many of the tier ones in the automobile industry, for example, because this was a big famous case, started to go under. The big tier ones, Mercedes, General Motors, BMW, others, literally went and took over the factories, not to where they own the management, but they went in, supplied the cash, supplied what was necessary to keep them running. You have to think of a tier two as your company. And if your tier two can't supply, they're gone. The other good news is the Chinese government is holding back on taxes on these tier twos, and also setting up so the banks can lend money on a much better basis. So the Chinese government is anticipating that also. Nonetheless, do I still think there will be a couple tier twos or tier threes who go under? Yes, of course, I do. But the tier ones will definitely have to help. Otherwise, the tier ones will be gone also. So there's no doubt that they're going to help. And you know, you mentioned the 60 blank sailings. There's going to be a significant inventory in the pipeline. Yeah, there is going to be. So there might be a 2-month, 3-month lull. Now, what some industries do is make you fly parts. If you are not doing very well and you have a problem, you'll start flying parts. You'll go into overtime, and you'll start to fly parts to your tier one. The tier one will probably help you pay for that. And as you fly parts, you'll also start to fill up the trains and boats, so that the trains and boats that will have to bring parts to you start to get full. And once that starts to happen, then you're okay. So you might have to fly parts for 2-3 months while you're sort of double producing. You go on to 12-hour shifts, you start to produce, and you fill up the pipeline. But in the meantime, to keep the tier one going, you're flying parts, and that can be tremendously expensive. For heavy parts, one of my customers was sending engine parts to the United States, and they needed to fly. We got them out of flying in about 6 weeks. They were having quality problems. That cost them $250,000 a month just in flights. An incredible amount of money. So
yeah, so that was going to be one of my next questions to you, David. Actually, so thanks for bringing that up, because I see some large OEMs are already got the charters going, etc. And then I saw the analysts talking about, as you quite rightly mentioned, that increased cost of the of material. Obviously, that's now going into the material price. And obviously, I think they realise that that's going to knock onto the results, knock-on effect on the results. So, how long do you think the whole recovery? You know, in your view, bear in mind, you know, we have these other epicenters now. We have Korea, we have Italy, we have Iran. We've had that disease spread across the Middle East by the looks of it. And of course, now we have this recent outbreak in the US, which looks like a domestic transmission, which isn't traced back to any travel source. So, what's your thoughts on that, as somebody who's on the ground and has their ear to the ground as such? What's your thoughts?
So I think China was huge because of the volume that happened in one province, and that didn't happen in other provinces. So they reacted quite strongly, and I think that's going to take at least 3 months to start to level out. And I would say not 3 months from today, 3 months from the middle of March. So sometime around the middle of June, I think that's going to go. It will really depend on what happens. I was part of the H1N1 that happened in North America, and that didn't stop us at all. All we did was cut back on the amount of people who could travel. We didn't allow people to travel from our central offices to us, or our clients didn't come see us anymore. And by the way, as a site director, not having visitors was always a good thing. So I thought that was a positive, but that's another story. because having guests always just makes for trouble. But
Yeah, exactly.
in general, I don't think it'll be a big problem in the other parts of the world as long as they as long as they hold it. What scares me, I'll be honest, is Africa and India. They're saying they've had no real outbreaks, and I don't know if that means they haven't had outbreaks or they just don't test right for them. I have a cousin that's a nurse and works in Africa, and she says she's not sure that they test. There's just diseases, people get sick, nobody really knows, so they don't know how fast and big they can do. They're not tracking this like they do Ebola or other things. So when you consider how many raw materials come from Africa and how many other things come, this could be a bigger thing, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody knows, and I think that is some concern, and I think India could be of some concern. Obviously, it's a highly populated country like China, and they haven't really talked much about it. So I don't know if they're testing. I don't know if they're really paying attention. I'm sure they're paying attention, but I don't know if they're really testing. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens to that. But in the United States, in Italy, I think those governments will take care of that quite quickly. Again, with the H1N1, I saw the U.S. government, the Mexican government, the Canadian government, and even it affected Taiwan a little bit in China. I saw them take that on very quickly, and I was running the largest factory for Foxconn in the Americas. We had 3.5 billion P&L, and I wasn't affected in any manner, way, or form back then.
So just on Korea, we see that Korea's dependent on China, but China's also dependent on Korea. So where do you see that story going? Because China appears to be coming out of it, and of course Korea looks like it's going into it as such.
Sure, it will depend, I think, on how strongly Korea shuts down. Korea has an extremely good medical system, as you know. They have an awful lot of doctors, an awful lot of hospitals. I don't think they're going to have. I think they'll be able to handle this quite well. They haven't shut themselves down yet, like China did. I think in the Chinese case, it got out of control in Wuhan so quickly. And again, I think the Chinese New Year didn't help at all. It probably hurt it. And so it's my personal opinion that the Koreans will deal with it, and economic growth will continue to still happen, albeit there might be isolated issues, but I don't think there's going to be an overall country issue. From what I've seen from other of these, I'm an old man, so this is the third or fourth one I've been through. I remember SARS and MERS and the other stuff, and the countries where there weren't lots and lots of people all grouped together like they are in China, India, and some other places, the people were able to control it faster. And yes, quarantined those that were sick, made sure that people couldn't get sick by checking, and it didn't really disrupt the economic flow like this is. And again, this is interrupting the economic flow primarily because of one province that's really bad. A little bit of an overreaction throughout China after that, a huge overreaction. And now that people are realizing they don't need that overreaction, it's just going down back to Hubei.
So just look, one last question before I pass you over to Alvin. So a couple of people have said to me, look, what's happened with the Chinese government. They have done a great job in closing this down. But how are we going to deal with a secondary wave? Because as we know, this thing's invisible, and it can quickly creep on us. And how do we manage that secondary wave?
So interesting that you said that. I was listening to a podcast from a doctor from the United States and a doctor from Canada yesterday, and they feel that this particular virus is potentially more more catchy than the normal flu. They think that 70 million people will catch it over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, but that its death rate isn't so high, so people will get used to it. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but that's what they said. They just said that this is new. There was some deaths, but the death rate is not so high, because I hope, people realize that the common flu kills 35, 40,000 people in the United States every year. Probably kills 10 times that in China every year. Because you're older, you have other problems, or you're too young. So just the common flu kills magnitudes higher than something like this. And from what I've also read, it looks like there's probably a vaccine for this on the near horizon. I did read something very serious today, which I didn't realize. A woman in Japan who had this virus and was considered, healed, now has it again. And so
I saw that one.
Yeah, so that was kind of a scary thing. It doesn't really go away, or does it go dormant in your body?
Correct.
Which is quite interesting.
And David,
which could be serious.
Yeah, correct. And I don't know if you saw in Hong Kong, they actually have a dog which has a mild infection. So
I saw that.
That's the first. Yeah. So that's the first case of human to animal. I mean, if it is that, I mean, obviously it needs to be investigated more. But look, go back to your just quickly before I pass you back over to Alvin, because I know there's some other questions. Look, on the contamination and particularly in South Korea and Iran and even Italy, if you look at the percentage rate, death rate in those countries, it seems to be pretty high. So, I think we're still in the early stages of actually understanding this dreaded disease, and as you quite rightly said, there's a lot of anomalies around it, I think the worst fear that if it does go out is that the health system, as we saw in Wuhan, just cannot cope with the volume of infected people.
I would agree.
What's your thoughts on that? Yeah,
I would agree with that. And the other thing to say, and this is kind of morbid, but there was a group of people who are Chinese who called around. It was quite an interesting set of podcasts that I listened to. They called around to different places in Wuhan, the undertakers. And from what I understand, there's 7 big cremation places in Wuhan itself. And they actually talked to the guy, and my wife is Chinese, and so they were speaking in Chinese, so she interpreted for me. And because my Chinese is not so good. And the guy was saying that double to triple what the Chinese government is reporting, because the Chinese government only knows about the people who are coming in to the hospitals. So your point is well taken, that in Iran or Korea or things like that, you're seeing a higher death rate. This could still be happening in China also, and we just don't know it.
Yeah, actually, I've got some breaking news. We have Nigeria. So your point on Africa, Nigeria records its first case.
Okay.
And then we have cases in New Zealand and Lithuania. And the other bit of breaking news that just come in, David, is Hyundai in South Korea. The union has announced that somebody is infected with the virus, and the plant is going to close. So obviously the shares have fallen there. All right, so look, I won't hog anything else, and I'll pass you straight over to Alvin for the next question. But thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Hi, David. This is Alvin here.
Hello, Alvin.
Hi. So back to China. I was just curious. I know the government has done many propaganda measures to prevent the
the virus from spreading and lockdowns been happening. But on the economical aspects of the support, is there any government support or local authority supporting the different states economically in a sense of like salary reimbursements or like medical supplies and stuff like that?
So medical supplies, yes. That's an interesting thing. We wanted to send masks. I'm in the Middle East right now. We wanted to send masks to our employees, but masks and things like that are getting taken by the government as they come in and then taken out and given out to places where they were. So the government is trying to help with that for sure, like masks, things like that. The other thing the government is helping economically is they're going to cut back on tax rates and taxes, which this could hurt the Chinese government and potentially put in a whole new part of things. And they've also opened up the banking system to give low to no interest loans in many provinces. Direct cash from the Chinese government, my understanding is that has not happened yet, not to say that it won't. The other scary thing is we're primarily talking right now about larger corporations and all, but friends of mine who own restaurants in China, I've talked to them, things like that, they're basically shut down. They're not allowed to open their restaurant, their bar, their whatever. And quite frankly, many of them, unless the bank where they got the loan to open it gives them some loan forgiveness for a while, 2 or 3 of them already said they're out of business. That will have a strong ripple effect throughout the economy because, you know, if you're familiar with China now, China's a home of shopkeepers. I mean, yeah, there's an awful lot of big companies doing business there, but the amount of small Chinese businesses is huge. And if they can't do business, these are people who, you know, live hand to mouth like most small businesses. And I could see them doing something. So will the government do that to help the shopkeepers, get the banks from not having to collect cash for a while so the shopkeepers can recover and things like that? That I have not seen yet. And the people who I talk to directly, because I talk to a lot of people directly every day, they have not said that that's happened yet. So, but yeah, in the form of tax abatements, in the form of, you know, very inexpensive bank loans, the Chinese government is supporting.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, because I would thought the authorities would step in on that to maintain some business to help some businesses with the cash flow problem, especially through this crisis. And I think the last question that I have before sorry, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, Alvin. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. No, it's just that on top of that, we're talking about crisis management, business continuity management. So there was a poll done that on the international crisis room that 60% of the companies actually has no BCP plans, especially when it's actually in their China operations. So what advice would you probably give them, or do you think it's something that they need to really focus on in their future plannings?
I will tell you, I think that number's much, much higher because we deal an awful lot with, although we deal with Fortune 500 type or World 1000 type companies, we also deal an awful lot what I would call the mid-cap companies, you know, about $250 million US and below. And then we do a lot of business with small companies too. And I would say in general, none of them have the systems or processes in place. And it's one of the things that we're blogging out to our customers that, you know, these systems and processes, 2 things. One, systems and processes like that just help you run a good business. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, standard work instructions. So if a new person has to come up, there's a standard work instruction with how to do this job. It's not just learn the job slowly but surely. You know, I even had one customer one time tell me, oh, my company's so big, the guy's doing it every day. Why do I need standard work instructions? He knows what he does. He does it 8 hours a day. Well, yeah, that's kind of true, but it's also not true if that guy doesn't show up that day for work. Then somebody else has to do the job. So these kinds of systems and approaches that do 2 things. One, are really good for business in general and will save you an incredible amount of money. Also are ways to, you know, help you put together your mitigation programs when you're going to have a problem. So you have these systems in place, and then you can use these systems, say, okay, we have this, we have this, we have this. Now what can happen to us? We might lose 30% of our work. How do we handle that? We might lose our workers. We might lose this supplier, this supplier. What do we do? How can we get rid of, how can we help that? One of the questions I have is to have dual suppliers. A lot of people think dual suppliers help, and they can help a lot. But the real problem with dual suppliers is if you're not giving enough volume to either supplier, you might be second, third, or fourth on their list when they come back up. If I'm a supplier, I'm going to go after the guy who pays me the most money first. So while dual suppliers can work and isn't a bad idea in many issues, you have to be careful. Where does that put you on the priority list? If instead of having just one supplier and you're number one on the priority list, and you have two suppliers and you're number 3 or 4 on both of their priority lists, you're more messed up than you can. So that will be supplier by supplier and component by component. Maybe you're big enough that you need 2 suppliers for a component, and that's a good thing. But if that reduces the supply and puts you down the list, again, if I'm a factory, I'm going after my big guy first, the one who's going to pay me the money first. And then I start moving down the list to supply to people who pay me less. And I think that's just human nature. That's normal. So, it's a good question to do. And also, if you have more than one supplier, obviously you have to have more than one set of tools. You have to have more than one set of everything. So this can be an issue and an expensive issue. So how do you mitigate that risk? One of them is to have more inventory, but again, inventory costs money. According to Harvard University, inventory costs approximately 25% of the value of the inventory you hold. So if you're holding 100 million RMB in inventory, that's worth 25 million RMB in costs a year. And that's an average across industries. Some industries are less, some industries are more. So,
hey, David, I was going to say, anyone that did have that dual sourcing, they must be laughing all the way to the bank at the moment, being able to still manufacture. But I take your point. It's always a difficult argument on tooling costs and also having dual suppliers or SOBI backup suppliers, because as you quite rightly say, you've still got to go through the PPAP stage and make sure all of the quality processes are in place.
Correct.
So, yeah. So look, we're on the hour now, 3 o'clock. So, Alvin, unless we've got any pressing, or is there anybody else that wants to ask David a question at all? If you just raise your hand,
I was just about to. Just about to open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions, give a couple of minutes for them to ask any pressing questions or queries they may have. Anyone? You can actually unmute yourself if you have any, or raise your hand and we will unmute it for you.
Oh, William, go ahead.
Hey, David. So first of all, thank you for the great presentations. So I have a question here, right? So we are focusing so much on China, but you bring up a very good point, right? So besides China itself, right now we have a more serious issue coming out. So what's your advice for company for the potential impact from all the growing cases, outside of China? Especially some that do not really have the mandate like China government to shut down cities for like this. So that's something that, what kind of advice do you have?
If I was that's a great question, William, because right now it's not a surprise, right? So you have this wonderful opportunity to potentially go in and see what your supplier is doing to you, or see what's happening to you, and maybe even help them. Remember one thing, one of the things people don't realize is that a lot of these companies don't have maybe the staff or the ability to do things like some of the bigger companies have. So if you have a mid-sized supplier that's supplying, let's say, wheels for tables, and I have a customer like this, could you go into that supplier right away and work with them? Because maybe they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the capability. I would be going in and checking out the areas. So South Korea is a good example. Do I have suppliers in South Korea? Do I have people in other countries that might be going? I would be working like crazy at this point in time, maybe even hiring, third-party inspection companies, companies like mine, that's a consulting company or whatever in the region, to go in and say, hey, what are you doing? How can we mitigate this? Where are your people coming from? Let's make a plan. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to get in and make a plan. If you just wait for something to happen, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. I would be walking in and making plans right now. You got to hire somebody, it might be worth it. If you don't have to hire somebody and you can do it yourself through one of your central office, we have a German supplier who's got two companies in, our German customer who has two companies in China, but they also have one in India, one in Germany, and one in Portugal. They've asked us to go to those places, those factories. The Chinese factory can't make it, so we're actually in Portugal, in Germany, and in India with them right now, making sure that they can run. We're checking their quality, seeing what they can change over to, and things like that, and helping them. So this is a wonderful opportunity for you to jump in. It's hard work, but anything worthwhile is hard work. So we're already doing that. It's one of the reasons I'm in the Middle East. We're getting the same kinds of things here in the Middle East. People have asked us, and we have a Middle East business as well, a North American and a Southeast Asia business. And we're being asked to go into places and help them.
Thank you.
William, hey, how are you? That was a good question. And I was astounded, like a few other supply chain professionals, that it was 60%, but listening to David and understanding it's possibly even higher, it's very scary. I do sometimes wonder, because I think you would agree with me, David, that this isn't the problem within the working ranks. This is a boardroom issue. If people are not having business continuity plans in place, just basic plans as such.
Correct. I would have to agree with that. And you have an opportunity now. When I was working for Foxconn, when the H1N1 hit, we already had some continuity plans, but we really worked hard to develop better ones. I think this helped the company. Sadly, people usually wait until there's some kind of big issue to work on these hard things. I think everybody should be doing it. And in fact, I will tell you, in the auto industry, we used to do continuity planning with governments, with police, with fire. We would have tabletop exercises every quarter in my factories, and this was across the board. I think most of them do it. We would come up with some issue, a fire happened in this area, or there was a bomb scare, or this, we lost this, and we even had police and fire come in with us so we could do tabletops and come out with what's wrong, what can we do better, how can we fix this, and those kinds of exercises. They take 4 or 5 hours. They're not long. And they're amazingly helpful.
And they do expose a lot of gaps, don't they?
They surely do. And we all have them, right? I mean, none of us are perfect. The more you practice something, the better you are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Fully agree. Okay, so David, Alvin, have we any more questions before I fight? If you don't mind, I'll just wrap up. Any more questions from anybody?
And I don't know if you can give them my email address. If they have questions in the future, I'm happy to answer emails and things like that. Just so you know, my email is david.collins, COLLINS, @cmc-consultants.com. I'm happy to answer questions from anybody.
Yeah, no, we'll certainly do that. We'll certainly make sure everyone's got those details. So, David, on behalf of TAPA and the TAPA members, I'd like to thank you. I think that's been an awesome presentation. Look, with some of the webinars that I've seen, there's a lot of academic sort of speculation on, whether we would be turning left or turning right. Look, to hear it from somebody that's not only worked in manufacturing, managed plants all across the world, but also have your team on the ground there. It's good to hear. I think that's been very useful. So David, once again, thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone for joining this afternoon. Okay, take care.
Nice to talk to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining the TAPA APAC webinar, and we hope that you enjoyed the presentation and question and answer session. Look out for more webinars coming up as part of our member services. The webinar and slides will be shared. If you have any questions, please contact the Secretariat. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar sessions.